This video is part of a series about Herbert Armstrong and the meetings he had with world leaders. While it is not necessary to watch them in order, it is recommended that you watch them all at some point.
The World Tomorrow. The Worldwide Church of God presents The World Tomorrow with Herbert W. Armstrong. Ladies and gentlemen, Herbert W. Armstrong.
Herbert Armstrong met with over 300 leaders of 83 different countries. As we saw in the last video, he often gave Steuben crystal obelisks as gifts. What gifts did leaders give him?
Ramon Bagaching, the mayor of Manila, presented him with the key to the city. Secretary of Social Welfare, Dr. Lim, a close and longtime friend, was one of the prime supporters of his public lectures. During this visit to the Philippines, he was again invited to meet with the president and members of his cabinet. President Marcos autographed copies of two of his most recent books as a personal gift. He enjoyed the recent Plain Truth magazine featuring an article about the Philippines. A gift of Steuben crystal presented to him by Mr. Armstrong was greatly appreciated and admired by President Marcos. President Marcos gave Mr. Armstrong his personal blessing on the upcoming series of lectures in Manila. The International Academy of Leadership gave him an award preceding one of his lectures. The Knights of Columbus honored Mr. Armstrong at a special luncheon meeting. Wherever he went, people wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to meet him personally and ask for his autograph.
Honored by the Knights of Columbus, the Catholic Secret Society, decorated by Filipino President Ferdinand Marcos for promoting world order.
The inscription, "To my good friend Mr. Herbert Armstrong," signed by King Hussein, is a testimony to the warm friendships Mr. Armstrong has developed with world leaders. Emperor Hirohito awarded him the Order of the Sacred Treasure. The Order of the Sacred Treasure is the most prestigious award that can be presented to a non-Japanese private citizen. Another great honor was presented to him by King Leopold III of Belgium.
But I have received one award that I prize very highly from King Leopold III of Belgium, which is one of 4 awards that have been given for the greatest accomplishment toward world peace. Now, the first one was given to General Foch. The second was given to General John J. Pershing, and the third to Premier Clemenceau of France. You may wonder why those men were awarded the prize for world peace. It was because we thought then that World War I was the war to end all wars. I was given the 4th award, and there were only 4, because King Leopold III felt that showing the cause of world wars and the way to world peace is more important than winning a war. So I've been showing the way to world peace.
What in the upside-down pentagram is this award? It's not surprising, seeing as King Hussein was the Grand Master of the Grand Masonic Lodge of Jordan. Why did Emperor Hirohito decorate Herbert with the highest honor given to a non-Japanese citizen? Well, according to Prime Minister Sato, it was for the help Herbert gave in the reversion of Okinawa back to Japan. The last award mentioned in this clip was a very rare award given by King Leopold for Herbert's contribution to world peace. Since when were any of God's ministers given the task of trying to usher in world peace? All of these are just a few of the awards and gifts that Herbert received. In addition, he was also awarded several times by the Lions Club, and also here by the both then current president and president-elect of Rotary International. From the research I've done, these organizations are benevolent fronts for the Freemasons, which is why you often see them lumped together, especially near the welcome signs in small towns. There was much pushback against Freemasonry in the 1800s and early 1900s. In fact, the first third party in the United States was the Anti-Masonic Party, which later became known as the Whig Party. As a result of the opposition to the Freemasons, front organizations were formed like these to fulfill the Masonic requirement of benevolence and balancing out good and evil deeds. This brings up another award that Herbert received.
Now, by the way, let me interrupt right there and say the last time I was in Jerusalem, the patriarch of the Eastern Church at Jerusalem came to see me in my hotel suite. And he gave me what he considered the highest prize he could give, which was the Cross of Constantine. Constantine the Great, which dates back to 325 AD, almost 325 years after Christ. And Constantine, you know, is the one who called the Nicene Council and who practically dictated a lot of the doctrines of the Catholic Church. Constantine was the ruler of the empire at Constantinople, and Constantinople was named after him. Well, this cross, it's quite a good-sized cross if it was hanging on my, I think it's supposed to hang around your neck and hang down in front, and it would really show. It was gold and quite decorative, solid gold, and I was the 129th person to receive that award since 325 AD. So they consider it's a very high honor because very few have ever received it.
Why is Herbert getting a rare award in honor of the person who arguably corrupted and blended Christianity with paganism more than any other? I looked for this award and found out it is a very high-ranking Masonic decoration. In fact, many Masonic websites say the Order of the Red Cross of Constantine is considered by throughout Freemasonry worldwide to be the highest. While it has morphed into accepting other religions, from what I understand, Freemasonry was created to specifically blend the mystery religions with Christianity. So was Herbert a member of the Freemasons and or Rosicrucians? I think the burden of proof would be proving that he wasn't. Is it so hard to believe? Or are all of these things I bring up just a series of coincidences? Several former Worldwide Church of God ministers and members of Ambassador College, names that Church of God members would know, have said that many told them Herbert was a 33rd degree Mason, and the likely possibility that his son Garner Ted was too. Herbert always wanted to be important. Just read his autobiography. If you wanted to be important in this world, especially at the turn of the last century, you would join one of these orders. Masons pledge, on the penalty of death, an oath that they must help fellow Masons in need, and also do not rat out fellow Masons except in cases of murder or treason, and I have read that even those go out the window at the higher levels. If you were an ambitious young man in this time period, more than likely you would decide to join one of these orders. In Herbert's autobiography, he mentions the people that he looked up to. Ben Franklin was one of them. He was a Freemason and high-ranking occultist, and also a member of the notorious Hellfire Club. Orson Swett Marden was an author and a leader of the New Thought movement, which was a major contributor to the New Age movement. However, one of the people with the greatest impact on Herbert's life was a man named Albert Hubbard. Albert was a writer, philosopher, and Rosicrucian, and was the adoptive uncle of Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard. He was good friends with H. Spencer Lewis, the founder of the modern organization of Rosicrucians called Ancient and Mystical Order of Rosicrucis. The Rosicrucian chapter in Dayton, Ohio is named after him. Albert was also a major leader in the arts and crafts movement of the late 1800s and early 1900s. This was a societal pushback to the modernization of the Industrial Revolution. Hubbard set up an enclave campus in East Aurora, New York, outside of Buffalo, called Roycroft, and became a type of cult leader. Even though Albert died on the Lusitania in 1915, Herbert was so enamored with him that he met with him 3 times by the age of 22, as you can read in his autobiography. Here are a few clips about him from a PBS special entitled Elbert Hubbard, an American Original.
At 33, a new man was beginning to emerge. He'd later write that Alice had caused him to be born again. America, disenchanted with overspreading industrialization, was awakening to the ideals of reform embodied by Hubbard's writings and to the lure of the new aesthetic of arts and crafts. And although Hubbard had dropped out of the corporate world, he never left the salesman far behind. With arts and crafts, Elbert Hubbard saw the financial opportunity of packaging a product with a way of life. He bought the Roycroft Press, got the name and mark, and moved into a new shop. Local villagers were hired to print, bind, and illumine handmade books in the tradition of William Morris. Hubbard was a man of unlimited ambition and ego. He craved the spotlight and needed to be in charge, and knew that he'd never be the one calling the shots at the Larkin Company. So in 1892, he cashed out his stock options for $75,000, enough to take care of his family, and resigned his position. He saw himself as a cultural authority, a philosopher of the times, like his heroes Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman, whose words he often borrowed, repackaged, then used as his own.
His talent was really in packaging rather than in writing. What he does is take ideas from other people and package them in pithy sayings that stick in people's minds and give a certain kind of cultural currency to the author of them. But I think he figured out that worked.
He was branding himself right along with his products.
To wear a hat that is long out of fashion is to throw down the gauntlet to the bourgeoisie and say, "Behold, as I now cover my thinkery with a hat different than one you prescribe, so do I think thoughts that to you are impossible."
He was part bohemian and part cowboy, and marketing himself as a champion of freedom and artistic expression. But underneath it all, he was a businessman.
Although he liked to present himself as a pure partisan of the arts and crafts, he was willing to be a spokesman for the capitalists, for big American business, for the, quote, robber barons, for the great industrialists, and was happy to do that.
The allure of Roycroft drew more than just artists. It was to the early 20th century what communes and Woodstock were to 1960s America, a convergence of cultural and social ideals. And Roycroft became a pilgrimage for all who were seeking the experience. When they arrived, they found a romanticized community that seemed one step removed from time and place. And the man who was all about breaking the rules was propelled onto the national stage with an essay about following them.
There are parts of the contradiction of Hubbard that can never be unraveled. One of those contradictions is that Hubbard thought that it was okay for him to break the rules of society, but others should not be allowed to have the freedoms that he had.
Hubbard would parlay his literary trifle into the most successful arts and crafts community in the nation. With the success of A Message to Garcia, Hubbard became a celebrity. He crisscrossed the country speaking to packed houses. At times, the voice of business. At times, the voice of arts and crafts. But always a salesman for the Roycroft. And the campus grew. What began in the back room of an East Aurora print shop sprouted, stone by stone. With their lives in order, he and Alice tended to the business of Roycroft. From as early as 1897, it had been a magnet, drawing bohemians and artists from around the country. and the cast of characters grew with the campus. William Denslow, illustrator of The Wizard of Oz, was one of the first artists brought in by Hubbard. And others followed, like sculptor Jerome Connor. And they all had personalities that were artistic, avant-garde, and quirky.
It was a different class of people that gravitated toward it. I don't know if it was cult in the same way we look at cult now, but it was cult in that there was a certain gravitational effect on just some people.
When a young artist named Dart Hunter arrived at Roycroft, he wrote that the Roycrofters are a peculiar thinking people who are called cranks by outsiders, for they are all original thinkers.
The values that were here at Roycroft was just a perfect environment. People knew that they could come to the Roycroft and do their artwork and really grow artistically, unencumbered by the things of modern society.
An entire video could be done on how much Herbert patterned much of what he did after Elbert, from starting a place removed from society like Ambassador College, to marketing unique phrases like the world tomorrow, to repackaging the doctrines of Church of God minister G.G. Rupert as if they were his own. Herbert was so enamored with Elbert that it appears he was an influence in choosing Pasadena as a location for Ambassador College. Check out this clip from the 40th anniversary of Ambassador College.
And Mr. Armstrong realized that Southern California would also be an ideal place to establish the educational institution he needed. But where in Southern California? Hollywood was hardly the right environment, and the city of Los Angeles was too large. But 20 miles away, at the foot of the San Gabriel Mountains, was a city close to Hollywood broadcasting facilities, and yet with its own particular identity, Pasadena. A relatively quiet city founded in the last century by Midwesterners desiring to escape the harsh Indiana winters, Pasadena attracted thousands of visitors a year to its elegant hotels and ideal climate. The historian and philosopher Elbert Hubbard had written in 1914 that Pasadena was a perfect paradise. In all my little journeys, never have I found any place to compare in liveliness, beauty, and delightfulness to that threshold of Eden, Pasadena.
Pasadena was a known center for not only the wealthy elite on Millionaires Row at the turn of the last century, but was also a hotbed of occult activity, as was the entire Los Angeles area. Pasadena was home to a major independent chapter of the Theosophical Society. It was also home to the mystical Agape Lodge of the Ordo Templi Orientis, a secret society that at the time was led by the infamous occultist Aleister Crowley. Jack Parsons, a star pupil of Crowley, was a member of the lodge and co-founder of Jet Propulsion's laboratories. L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, was also a member of this lodge. Parsons and Hubbard did many occult rituals at their house on Orange Grove Boulevard, which was less than a mile from where Herbert started Ambassador College the next year. This may be just another coincidence, but it's interesting that JPL used Ambassador Auditorium several times, including the live broadcast of the Viking 1 mission to Mars. One of the hallmarks of Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism is syncretism. Oxford defines syncretism as the amalgamation or attempted amalgamation of different religions, cultures, or schools of thought. Synchronism is essentially the doctrine of Balaam and a form of Hermeticism. It's not a full frontal attack on biblical Christianity to eliminate it, but rather blends the holy and the profane. It's lukewarm. When Herbert met with leaders, much of the language he used sounded very much like syncretism. Listen to these clips of him speaking with Egyptian leadership.
And I think the personage I mean by God is the same personage you mean by Allah. Isn't that correct?
Exactly. We are living in a creation. There has to be a creator.
Yes.
And in the Christian world, we call the creator God. And in the Hebrew world, or the world of Judaism, they call him God. And you call him Allah.
Yes, we call him Allah.
The same God.
Yes.
And God is going to bring us peace, but there is a reason why he is using these three nations now. And if we don't bring peace now, at least it is going to come.
Yes.
Allah will bring us peace.
Of course.
And not only to these three nations, but to the whole world. It is going to come to the whole world. And I'm not in politics. I'm an observer. I just look on. I represent God, Allah, and all people. Not any one nation, not any one religion, not any one government. But I'm a friend of all, and I work for peace among all nations. And that is a contribution to peace. The fact there is a creation means there had to be a creator. There had to be a designer, of one who could design and could create what he designed. That is one that in the Western world we call God, that in the Arab world you call Allah. And if I understand correctly, it's the same God, the same Allah.
Yes, that's right.
So I would like to tell you what he, Allah, is going to do for the Arab world and for the peace of all mankind. And I am speaking on his authority. I'm not saying maybe, I'm not saying perhaps, I'm telling you what is certain. I'm not here to cram anything down your throat. It will happen, and when it happens, you will know that God or Allah sent a messenger here to tell you this, because I am his servant. And it is going to happen in our time. I hope you will be able to continue this project, and that God, or shall I say Allah, will protect your life.
Thank you very much for that.
Or how about the Tri-Faith Center that Herbert supported?
It was at this meeting that President Sadat unveiled a bold new undertaking for the cause of world peace, a proposed $70 million World Peace Center to be built at the base of Mount Sinai. Impressed by the significance of such a monument, Mr. Armstrong offered both moral and financial support for the venture.
But first let me say this, that President Sadat had planned to erect a peace complex at the base of Mount Sinai. Prime Minister Begin of Israel had agreed to give the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. And President Sadat was going to build this complex at the base of Mount Sinai to be a symbol for peace between the Arab world and Israel and the Christian world of the West. The complex was to include a mosque, a synagogue, and a church to symbolize the peace between the three nations, representing the religions of the three nations of Islam, Judah, and Christianity.
This project was eventually completed in 2023 in Abu Dhabi and is called the Abraham House. This synchronistic behavior wasn't just in the Middle East. Herbert had a strange affinity with Buddhism and Buddhist monks. In fact, one Buddhist who worked for the church believed everything Herbert said and placed flowers on his grave every week until he was killed in a car crash.
From Manila, Mr. Armstrong flew to Bangkok, capital of the Kingdom of Thailand. He was met at Don Muang International Airport by Ambassador College representatives and several Thai dignitaries, including Abbot Pratap Sapon, president of the Wat Thai Buddhist Temple in Los Angeles and a leading religious figure in Thailand and the United States.
Several Buddhist monks showed up in full garb at Herbert's funeral. Listen to what Aaron Dean said about the Supreme Patriarch of Buddhism.
But that's okay. It's there. There he's again meeting with the Supreme Patriarch of Buddhism. The Supreme Patriarch it was interesting what he said up to Mr. Armstrong at one time. He was talking to other people like that, and he said, if only people did what Mr. Armstrong said, we'd have world peace. Mr. Armstrong is for the world what Buddhism is for Thailand.
Herbert was to the world what Buddhism is for Thailand? That shouldn't be considered a compliment. Herbert also had a strange affinity with Judaism and Israel. Herbert met with all 7 prime ministers and 7 presidents of Israel from 1968 until 1975. They rolled out the red carpet for him. Herbert, through Ambassador College, was given access to dig at the Temple Mount for 20 years. It was rumored that the main thing they were looking for was the Ark of the Covenant. It's interesting that 2 of Herbert's assistants, Stanley Rader and Robert Lawrence Kuhn, who were both still Orthodox Jews, sued George Lucas for the right to the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, saying that Lucas stole the script from them. More strange coincidences aside, an even stranger thing happened in 1984, as described here by Aaron Dean.
In 1984, I was in his house, and some Levites, they were priests actually, that came to the door, knocked on the door. There were 4 of them. They had the curls and the black hats and black garb, and so it's pretty easy to know who they were. And they wanted to see Mr. Armstrong. And so I asked Mr. Armstrong, do you want to see them? And he said, sure. So he came in, they talked to him. And they said they wanted him actually to help fund a temple they wanted to build. They already had all the temple accoutrements, the horns, the silver things. I mean, you can read all the things that they had. They had the red heifer, the garments. They were raising money to build that temple.
Levite priests asking Herbert to help build the 3rd temple? Herbert was such an ardent supporter of Israel, he had Star of David diamond cufflinks. Unbeknownst to many Jews and Christians, this symbol is not the Star of David. The hexagram is an ancient pagan symbol used throughout Hinduism, Buddhism, and Freemasonry, among others. In fact, the square and compass of Freemasonry looks a lot like an unfinished hexagram. The oldest known finding of this symbol was on an Armenian dig circa the 3rd millennium BC. The symbol of the Jews up until the modern Zionist movement was the menorah from the tabernacle in the wilderness, not a hexagram.
Perhaps Mr. Armstrong's warmest relationships with governmental and educational leaders in this area of the world are in Israel. Back in 1968, Ambassador College, under the auspices of the Worldwide Church of God, entered a joint participation with Hebrew University in a large archaeological project in Jerusalem's Temple Mount. More recently, Mr. Herbert Armstrong traveled to Israel to participate in a dedication ceremony with Mayor Teddy Kollek at Jerusalem's Liberty Bell Park. A stone marker in the park honoring Herbert Armstrong was unveiled in recognition of his sponsorship of the children's playground area. Later that same day, Mr. Armstrong and his party were entertained by a special performance of Israel and Arab youths at the ICCY, International Cultural Center for Youth. On the square at the ICCY, a plaque honors Mr. Armstrong as well. During his stay in Israel, Mr. Armstrong spoke to many prominent dignitaries at a luncheon in his honor at Mount Scopus campus of the Hebrew University. It was hosted by Professor Mazar and Dr. Aviram, and the Deputy Prime Minister of Israel, Yigael Yadin. In recognition of Mr. Armstrong's 10-year participation with Israeli leaders in government and education, he had several meetings at the Knesset with Prime Minister Menachem Begin, Foreign Minister Moshe Dayan, Shimon Peres, Chairman of Israel's leading Labor Party, and the Speaker of the Knesset, Itzhak Shamir. He then visited the President of Israel, Itzhak Navon, at his home. Thus, in recent years, these visits of Herbert Armstrong to various world leaders have become the focal point of the Church's Great Commission.
Seeing as Herbert was afforded such a unique opportunity, and being the leader of a Christian denomination, what did he say when he had these meetings? Did he preach the gospel? He said that he preached the gospel. He bragged about it. In fact, he said he was the only one preaching it, and that God had restored the only true gospel through him.
And I'm here to bring you the truth. So I ask you to open your ears and to listen, because you don't hear this from any other voice. No one else is telling you the things that God is telling you through me. I wonder how many of you believe what I say tonight. He's speaking through me. He has sent me here to talk to you, to give you His word. Right now you're hearing the proclaiming of the gospel of the kingdom of God. You haven't heard that before unless you've heard me preach before. You know you haven't. But you can find it in your own Bible if you want to look there. It is there. And that is the gospel, and that is the only gospel. And you're hearing it. It's in your ears tonight. And don't you ever stand in the judgment before your Maker and say, well, Lord, why didn't you tell me? I never knew. He'll say, I told you. My servant Herbert Armstrong was there in Manila that night. He told you. And God has sent me to the kings and to the tops of nations even. And this gospel of the kingdom is going to all the world. That's going to follow the proclaiming of the true gospel that I'm doing tonight in your ears. You're hearing that prophecy fulfilled in your ears this night. Now the time has come. The gospel of the kingdom of God is being restored, and God is restoring it through me.
Being the salesman and marketing guy that he was, he took a unique angle when it came to saying what the gospel was.
We're commissioned to get the gospel, and the gospel is the good news of the coming kingdom of God. It's not a gospel about Jesus Christ, it's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's the gospel He proclaimed, and the gospel He proclaimed is the good news of the coming kingdom of God.
With all of the research I've done, Herbert saying that the gospel was about the kingdom and not Christ was the most repetitive thing he said by far. He was wrong. In fact, he went as far to say many times that he was the only one who had preached the gospel in 1900 years. If the gospel is the power under salvation, as Paul says in Romans, and Christ said the gates of hell would never prevail against the church, then isn't Herbert contradicting Jesus by making such a statement? A kingdom is defined by four main items: jurisdiction, laws, citizens, but most importantly, the king. We literally define eras of history as to who the monarch was. The king is the most important thing about a kingdom. While it is true that many churches do not teach the gospel in the context of a kingdom, to leave out the king is not just irresponsible, it's another gospel. Luke chapter 24 describes the time period after the resurrection, which is arguably the most important thing that's ever happened in human history. Jesus comes up to two guys on the road to Emmaus, and what does he talk to them about? Everything mentioned about himself in the law of Moses and the prophets. And if that's not enough, he disappears and then reappears in the middle of the disciples and tells them everything about himself from the law of Moses to the prophets and the Psalms. And if that's not enough, look at what Jesus says to the Pharisees in John chapter 5. You search the scriptures diligently because you think that in them you have eternal life. These are the very scriptures that testify about me, yet you refuse to come to me to have life. It's always been about him. He is the door to the sheepfold. He is the Alpha and Omega. He is the author and finisher of our faith. Herbert delegated Jesus to not much more than a messenger, a newscaster, or a prophet. Talk about syncretism. He even often mocked the idea of giving our heart to Jesus, despite the fact the Bible mentions numerous times to circumcise our hearts and that we are to worship with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Not only did Herbert preach a different gospel, but by his own admission, he wouldn't even preach the gospel he said he believed in to world leaders.
Listeners, viewers, know that I travel over the world, that I speak personally with many heads of governments in many nations all over the world. And some people have asked me, well, what do I talk about? Do I try to tell them about Jesus Christ? Do I try to get them to give their hearts to Christ and to be converted, to receive Christ? No, and even Jesus himself, when he was on earth, didn't ask people to receive him, and wouldn't they give their hearts to him? he talked to them about the things they were interested in.
When you meet with these world leaders, you travel around the different countries, what do you discuss with them?
Oh, what do I discuss with them?
What do you tell them?
Well, look, I'm not going out to try to convert them.
No.
I am going because in many countries I have found you can't get in there with a religious message that you want to get to their people unless you have been approved at the top. Mm-hmm. Really, my whole purpose in going to the heads of state is to establish myself so that I can get into the country and get the gospel message into the country to the lay people in that country. When I am talking with a king, a president, a prime minister, or an emperor, and there have been two, one is now dead, but I had 2 meetings with him. Now, the Bible is concerned in its history with government up to the time of the Acts of the Apostles. The Bible is concerned through its prophecies about world events clear up into our time and past. The Bible is concerned about these things. And I talk to them about those things and about the things that are of interest to them. I don't go in and say, have you given your heart to the Lord? Wouldn't that be silly if I would go into the Emperor of Japan that is worshipped as a very God himself and say something like that? And yet I spent about 35 minutes with the Emperor of Japan, and the only man allowed to go in with me was the United States ambassador.
I'm pretty sure Jesus didn't say, "Go ye therefore into all the world and sneak the gospel in under the radar." Didn't Jesus also say that if you confess me before men, I will confess you in front of the Father? But if you deny me in front of men, I will deny you in front of the Father? All of the apostles boldly proclaimed Christ and the gospel, even in front of leaders. Paul had such an effect on King Agrippa that he says he was almost persuaded to become a Christian. If the open door you say you have involves you not being able to talk about Jesus, then God didn't open the door.
I visit many heads of state all over the world. I probably have visited more heads of government in their own offices than any other man. And so often people ask me, well, what do I talk about? Do I preach Christ to them? Do I try to get them to accept Christ? I think it's about time we understand. If I went in with some message like that, will you give your heart to the Lord? I would be thrown out on my ear. In other nations, in foreign nations where they have different religions, they don't want some other religion coming in.
Yes, sir. It's right here.
I have to use a little more wisdom. What do I talk about? I talk about the conditions that they're confronted with. I talk about world conditions and problems that are far greater than they themselves are able to cope with. I talk about the cause of these conditions. I go as an ambassador, an unofficial ambassador for world peace, and they receive me as an ambassador for world peace. But I have to tell them why we don't have peace. I have to show them how peace is going to come and why we don't have it. Now, actually, the cause is the violation of God's law. Do I talk to them about God's law? Do I talk to them about sin? Of course I do, but I don't use those terms. I don't talk as a religious man. So I talk to them in language they understand.
When Herbert says he doesn't speak as a religious man, but he uses language leaders understand, what type of language did he use? More syncretism.
An important business magazine in the United States carried an editorial which said it would seem that the only hope of humanity now lies in the sudden appearance and intervention of a strong hand from someplace. It would seem that the only hope of this world today lies in the intervention of an unseen strong hand from someplace. That now our number one problem is that of survival of the human race. And he said it would seem now that the only hope that we have in the world would be the sudden intervention of a strong, unseen hand from someplace. Now, I have the pleasure to announce to you tonight, not to try to convince you, but to announce to you that what some of the leading scientists say is our only hope is going to happen, and that unseen hand is going to appear, and we are going to have world peace in our time.
The following evening, the site was Peking's Great Hall of the People, the official nerve center of the Chinese government from which all Communist Party activities are controlled. Mr. Armstrong was introduced by Mr. Yamashita, a senior member of the Japanese Diet. Mr. Armstrong powerfully addressed not only Chinese officials, but also ambassadors representing 76 nations. Again, his topic was the good news of the coming kingdom of God.
Some time ago, the editor of a weekly news magazine in the United States, in an editorial, was saying that it would seem now that the only hope of human survival in this world is the sudden intervention of a powerful, unseen hand from someplace. And I'm here to announce that that is going to happen. That's precisely what is going to happen. And in our time, and peace is coming to all nations and to the whole world.
Will humanity survive? The answer is in the message proclaimed by Herbert W. Armstrong, Ambassador for World Peace.
Every trouble, every bit of woe and unhappiness and suffering in this world has come from living the way of get. Now, we're not going to have a better world until we get off of that way of get and get on to the way of give. We're not going to do that ourselves. Human nature is a little too strong. It isn't going to let us. It's going to have to be done to us. And then that all-powerful, unseen, strong hand from someplace is going to intervene in this world's affairs and is going to save humanity from itself.
A strong, powerful, unseen hand from someplace. I could spend an hour reading the amount of times he used this term in print, let alone in video. United Church of God minister Victor Kubik sure was impressed by its usage in a podcast with Aaron Dean.
When I was a pastor of churches at that time and seeing this in our church news, it was exciting, more exciting because it was the message that he spoke. It was not some type of fuzzy message about self-enhancement or whatever. It was a message about the return of a higher power to really fix this world. And I think that everybody knows that this world is broken, needs to be fixed, but they don't know how to do it. They can't do it. And to have this unseen hand, which I thought was a remarkable marketing, terminology of having this hand from outside this earth come and straighten this out. And Mr. Armstrong had a talent for being able to express it.
The unseen or hidden hand is a known Masonic term. Is this just another coincidence? Even to this day, people will pose for a picture with their hand in their jacket or waistcoat. This is done as a sign of allegiance. Either that or there's an epidemic of people with a singular cold hand. I find it disturbing not only that Herbert used the term, but that other Church of God ministers give the stamp of approval. I guess it really shouldn't surprise me, though. Earlier we saw some of the gifts and awards that Herbert received from leaders. But what did these leaders say about him and what he was doing?
Called a builder of bridges between nations, Herbert W. Armstrong continues his efforts for world peace. Listen to Dr. Mohammed Hatem, close personal advisor of President Sadat.
It is a pleasure to me, personally,
to receive you, Mr. Armstrong, here, because I know you from a long time, and I know what you are doing for the humanity in all the world. Ambassador Foundation is promoting better understanding between all peoples in all the world. They had about 26 projects in 26 countries in the world.
Promoting better understanding between all peoples? A builder of bridges between all nations? Is it yet another coincidence that this is a Masonic term? From the website MasonicTrowel.com. Masons build bridges of understanding. We construct passageways of friendship between persons who may differ in church or language or race. We build tolerance as a conveyance that brings human beings together. Building bridges of friendships is at the heart of Masonry. Several leaders from Israel gave this title to Herbert. Once again, this shouldn't be considered a compliment.
In recognition of Mr. Armstrong's heartfelt efforts at promoting human understanding, Jerusalem Mayor Teddy Kollek hosted a banquet in his honor.
The ambassadors of ambassador, the people who are here, are fulfilling a tremendous role for peace in the world. They are here today. They are going to South Africa and to Russia and to China and to many of the countries of Europe, all in the mission of more human understanding. And I want to thank you for your good relationship to us, for your friendship for us, for your efforts that you are making here.
It has given me a great honor and privilege to introduce such a great man who is visiting our country. A person like Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong. This gentleman, from all his life, has one ambition and one thought, and that is peace in the world. There should be peace, no war.
We are very thankful to you for taking time off to visit our country and discuss matters with us, and for the great service you are rendering to mankind.
I want to emphasize the fact that Mr. Armstrong is a man who is rather unique. And I think almost everybody that has ever met him recognizes that just upon seeing him for the first time. I've been impressed by the fact that people size him up very, very quickly and very correctly. Last September, for example, we were in Lebanon, and we went into the office of the Prime Minister. Now, in Lebanon, the government is a democracy that is divided between the Muslims and the Christians or Catholics. And by constitution, the president has to be a Catholic and the Prime Minister has to be a Muslim. So we had already seen the president, and we were ushered in to meet the Prime Minister, who had just returned from the conference in Algiers. And he grasped Mr. Armstrong's hand, and he looked into his eyes, and he said, "Mr. Armstrong, your character can be read just by looking at your face." He said, "Mr. Armstrong, you are a fine man, and you're doing great work. And great men must continue to do great work. Your Secretary of Social Welfare, Mrs. Lim, I think has said it rather well in this brochure that we're going to be handing out tomorrow. She has summed it up rather well when she said, out of a lifetime of sharing his message of love, peace, and brotherhood all over the world, Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong comes to the Philippines, bringing the very challenges which the new society asks from each of us. I sincerely wish him Godspeed as he continues to strengthen the spirit and nourish the soul with the words of God.
I'm very happy today to visit the home base of Mr. Armstrong, a gentleman whom I consider to be my true personal friend, as well as the friend of all men of goodwill in this world. Because of his wisdom, far-sightedness, and humanitarian heart, he knows it is meaningless to talk about security, democracy, and international cooperation when a large number of people still hardly have enough to keep body and soul together. I know that his financial aid to various projects has been extremely generous, but I think that he is most appreciated because of the spiritual impact he makes. To those who meet him, he is the symbol of the warm-hearted citizen of the advanced countries who is willing to understand, give encouragement, and lend a helping hand when needed.
Queen Sirikit also attended a number of banquets and receptions in her honor. Present were many state and local dignitaries.
So I think Mr. Armstrong and my husband have the same goal, the common goal, that is the harmony, the world harmony, and better understanding between people in all over the world.
Is it just me, or do you feel like we're listening to the lyrics of a John Lennon song? When Herbert died, he received many interesting condolences from world leaders. Here are a few. I was greatly saddened to learn of the passing away of Mr. Armstrong. From the time of the San Francisco conference, which he attended as a journalist, Mr. Armstrong took a strong and supporting interest in the United Nations. With his wide ties throughout the world, he pursued the cause of peace and harmony among all peoples. My wife and I indeed recall our meeting with him in San Francisco last June, and looked forward to seeing him subsequently in New York. We would like to express our sincere condolences on this sad occasion. From the Secretary General of the United Nations. How about one Chinese official commenting on how sharp Herbert was with his international affairs, and that the meeting of Chinese Premier Deng Xiaoping was of great importance? Lastly, this quote from Leopold Rothschild. On my return from traveling abroad, I was saddened by your telegram. Please convey to all concerned with Mr. Armstrong's important work. What important work was Leopold Rothschild talking about? If you were never a part of the Worldwide Church of God, or are too young to remember, all we ever heard about was the work, the work, the work. What was the work, you might ask? The following clips will help give you a little bit of insight.
And this says to lift up your voice with strength, lift it up. Be not afraid. And I'm not going to be afraid. Say unto the cities of Judah, behold that your God. God is preparing the way for me to say that very thing before the cities of Judah, or the towns and villages of Judah, as some of the translations give it in the English language. Behold, the Lord God will come with a strong hand, and his reward is with him, and his work before him, and another place, his arm will rule for him. And I happen to be strong arm or Armstrong, whichever way you want to record. If there's any significance to that, I don't know. Behold, the Lord God will come with a strong hand, and his arm shall rule with him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his work before him. Brethren, we're doing that work.
What do we call it? We call it the work.
In the 1930s, when the work was small, Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong could personally write receipts for the tithes and offerings sent in by the handful of loyal members and co-workers. But now God has added many additional thousands to support a worldwide work. The day-to-day financial affairs are supervised by Treasurer Leroy Neff.
How's everything in your department?
Well, it's going quite well, sir. We would hope that it would do a little better, of course, financially. But, you know, it sort of goes up and down a little bit.
Well, there's just one way to make it come in better. If we please Christ more, he will reward us.
Yes, sir.
Send it in.
Yes, sir.
In his sermons and Bible studies, Gerald Waterhouse always encourages the local congregations to see the big picture and to stay loyally in support of Mr. Armstrong and the end-time work of God.
In other words, God had to make possible a worldwide work through one man to build a team from the worldwide makeup of humanity, and then put them through a process of final training until they become one. Then through them he deals with the rest of mankind and the future generations, and finally prepares to resurrect the rest of the dead and bring them into the family of God.
And the Great Tribulation won't come until after the United States of Europe has been formed. Leaders in Europe are very anxious to have a united Europe and see it get together and restore the old so-called Holy Roman Empire. I know prophecy said it is going to happen. I know it's going to happen in our time, and it's really surprising it hasn't happened before now. I would say, if anything, it is overdue. I believe it is more than possible that God himself has delayed and held it up. He's wanted this work to go to the world, and it has had to go to the world, and I've had to go to the kings of the world. And I have done that.
Church leaders contend that the state remains adamantly ignorant of the significance of Herbert Armstrong's travels. The state, they say, insists on viewing the trips and the money spent on them as it would view the travel expenses of any corporation. But to members of the church, these trips are not a corporate operating expense to be minimized. They are the heart of the church's work. They are a tool that has been nurtured for a decade, to the point where these trips are now the church's most significant avenue for preaching the gospel.
It appears that the work started out as Herbert giving messages on radio and television, but eventually became Herbert meeting with world leaders, as announcer Art Gilmore said in the last clip and in this article here on screen. Herbert having meetings with world leaders was the work. As I was doing my research, I noticed that the W in work was always capitalized. This is known as reverential capitalization. Reverential capitalization is the practice of capitalizing words that refer to deities or divine beings, or pronouns that refer to them when they would not otherwise be capitalized. For instance, the L in Lord, or the F in Father, or capitalizing the pronoun he when referring to God or Christ. So the fact that the W in work was capitalized is an important distinction. As I did more research, I found that oftentimes, especially earlier in his ministry, Herbert would refer to it as the great work, and he mentioned it dozens, if not hundreds of times. What I found out next shocked me. Perhaps it's just yet another Masonic coincidence, but the great work is a foundational saying and tenet of the occult. When I say fundamental, I'm not exaggerating. It's a who's who of famous occultists, from Albert Pike, to Manly P. Hall, to Eliphas Levi, to Aleister Crowley. The great work is often referred to as the end goal of alchemy and Hermeticism. The website Learn Religion says, the ultimate goal of alchemy is a process known as the great work, or the magnum opus in Latin. This involves spiritual transformation, the shedding of impurities, the joining of opposites, and the refinement of materials. Aleister Crowley says the great work is the uniting of opposites. It may mean the uniting of the soul with God, of the microcosm and the macrocosm, of the male and the female, of the ego with the non-ego, or whatnot. This is most succinctly pictured by the Baphomet, a drawing by 19th century occultist Eliphas Levi. It merges male and female. human and animal, and human and demonic. Some of the very things that God made of their own kind and separate, they want to try and merge. It's no wonder we have a transgender movement and are on the cusp of full-blown transhumanism. It's been the goal of the secret societies since at least the Tower of Babel and Nimrod. So how did Herbert's great work fit into any of this? God separated the nations at the Tower of Babel and scattered the occult pre-flood knowledge with them. This certainly slowed down the reassembling of this knowledge until recent times. Where does God say in the Bible that it is the job of any minister to try to gather the nations together to an attempt at world peace? I know of none. If anything, the only time the nations gather together is to fight Christ at his return. Herbert said his work was the meetings that he had with world leaders. He was called a builder of bridges between all nations. He was called an unofficial ambassador for world peace. Will we have peace before Christ returns? No. In fact, the Bible tells us there will be a false peace among nations, and that when they say peace and safety, then comes sudden destruction. Based upon my years of research, the only conclusion that I can deduce is that the great work of Herbert Armstrong was the work of the enemy, not of God. Some may think, how is this possible? He preached commandment keeping, he taught from the Bible, he even started a Bible college. In order to understand how this could be possible, we must first look at Occultism 101. The occult is all about duality and the blending of opposites. Dark and light, hot and cold, good and evil, black and white. This is exemplified by the yin and yang symbol, and we are inundated by these notions everywhere, particularly in Hollywood. In Star Wars, the whole reason Anakin was the chosen one was that he was to bring balance to the Force. He was to balance out being Anakin along with being Darth Vader. The same principle applies to the devil. He is Satan the adversary, but he also plays the role of Lucifer the light-bearer. As Paul says, he masquerades as an angel of light, and so do his ministers. The black and white checkerboard floors and pillars of the Masonic Hall illustrate this point as well. At first glance, it would seem that Freemasonry teaches that there are two pillars, but as you climb up the Masonic ladder, as pictured here, they teach that there are three pillars. The goal is to merge the two pillars into one in the same manner the World Trade Center towers went from two to one. The higher up the occult ladder one climbs, the more evil and good their deeds need to be. Benevolence is part of their religion just as much as wickedness. The reason that Shriners have circuses and children's hospitals is because so many of them are perverts and pedophiles. The Clintons, Gates, Rockefellers, as well as many others have foundations that do good works, but it is to try to balance their evil deeds out. Starting in 1975, most of what Herbert did overseas was under the auspices of the Ambassador Foundation, and the man who was the most prominent voice for commandment keeping in the 20th century was also at the very heart of the nations coming together for the first time since the Tower of Babel. Do I have proof that Herbert was a card-carrying member of the Freemasons, or Rosicrucians, or that he was a Kabbalist? No, but how he operated sure looks similar. In fact, from what I've read, the highest-ranking occultists do not get there by going through organized systems like these. An honorary 33rd degree Mason gets to the same level, but apart from their systematic methodology. There were many other strange coincidences that I found in my research. Early on in Herbert's ministry, they often met in Masonic halls and or Oddfellows lodges. This is a trend that continued for the entire existence of the Worldwide Church of God, and continues now with its splinter groups. I asked 43 different people who had attended Worldwide, all from the United States, and 75% of them said that they regularly or occasionally met in Masonic halls. For those not aware, Worldwide never bought their own local church buildings, except in Pasadena. They only rented facilities. Some have said that maybe it's just because they were cheap. Maybe, but we certainly wouldn't have met in Catholic or even Baptist churches. Why meet in halls that are blatantly demonic? Do I think there was some sort of grand conspiracy to meet in Masonic halls? No, not in the natural, but most certainly in the demonic realm. Satan would like nothing more than neutering God's people, and in making us look like a laughingstock. Ambassador Auditorium was a multi-million-dollar performing arts center built in 1974. Interestingly enough, the church had a booklet entitled 1975 in Prophecy, which was written in 1956, which insinuated that Christ would return by 1975. So it's not theologically consistent for a building of this nature to have ever been built. Why build something that would only be used for a year? The auditorium was patterned to be a combination of the Greek Parthenon and Solomon's temple. Is it just a coincidence that Freemasonry reveres Solomon and his temple? The auditorium was dedicated to the great God. I'm almost surprised it didn't say great architect of the universe. The carpet of the auditorium was hand-woven in Asia so that it would reflect the lights from the 1390-piece crystal chandelier. This sounds a lot like as above, so below symbolism, as do the reflecting pools around the perimeter. The egret statues out front were made by sculptor David Wynn, who had worked in that same year with the Beatles and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and was the man who introduced the two of them together, and as a result the floodgates opened for Hinduism in the West. Is it just another coincidence that Herbert's seminal work, The Mystery of the Ages, has an almost identical title to occultist Manly P. Hall's seminal work entitled The Secret Teaching of All Ages?
Here is to the happiest moments of my life that were spent in the arms of another man's wife, my mother. And by the way, her favorite psalm is the one that you just sang out in front. The 133rd Psalm. How good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity.
Is it a coincidence that Herbert said his mother's favorite verse was from Psalms 133? Is it also a coincidence that a Mason's Lodge of origin is called their Mother Lodge? This psalm is at the front of every Masonic manual and is read at every reading. I obtained a Masonic Manual of Missouri from 1947 and confirmed this. Ross Jetsam, a composer for Worldwide, even created a song from this psalm. Is it just a coincidence that the organizational structure of Worldwide was much like a secret society? Not only just in its top-down elements, but also by concentric rings. The brethren knew very little and were the power base. The average minister was a little bit more enlightened. The evangelists were even more privy to things until you finally had Herbert's inner circle of Stan Rader, Robert Kuhn, Osamu Goto, and then at the very end, mostly just Aaron Dean, although I suspect a few others. Many have testified to me that Herbert had security guards, and nobody got in his inner circle. It's questionable if his own son Garner Ted was even in that circle. Is a church supposed to be ultra-compartmentalized and organized in a top-down fashion? No. Jesus specifically said not to rule as the Gentiles do, exercising dominion over others. He's the cornerstone, not the capstone. Man's governmental systems are top-down. God's system is bottom-up. Jesus is the chief cornerstone, and we are to build on him. He supports us, and we are in turn to support others. For everything the Worldwide Church of God had right doctrinally, they seem to make up for it by overlooking some plain basic teachings from the Word. One of the final telltale signs of occultism is sexual perversion. At their core, secret societies are sex cults, hence the obelisks. From numerous sources, it is said that Herbert's son Garner Ted had sex with over 200 women from Ambassador College while he was in Pasadena. So well known were Garner Ted's exploits that Hustler magazine ran an article about him in 1978. Many of these women became pastors' wives. Many evangelists at headquarters knew of these things and swept them under the rug. However, this was not just a problem at headquarters. I've been told multiple accounts of pastors having an affair with women in their church and then being promptly moved on to another congregation to do it again. I've also been told by several that pedophilia was a big problem, particularly in Pasadena at Imperial schools. It's a matter of public record that the former head of the church's International Youth Program, YOU, Kevin Dean, was messing around with underage girls at that time back in the 80s and is currently in prison, presumably for the remainder of his life, for abusing a female family member from age 4 until age 14. What about Herbert? There have been many rumors, but the most heinous of them I can finally put to rest now. It was said by several former pastors that Herbert had an incestuous relationship with his underage daughter over a 10-year period starting in 1933. Over the last 10 years, both Herbert's niece and grandson have confirmed these allegations, as heard in these next two clips.
But there's one rumor that I think a lot of people would be interested to know your take, and I know some in your family have a similar take. And it's a touchy subject, but I'm going to go ahead and broach it. And that is the rumor that Herbert had committed incest with his daughter. I believe for a man to present himself as God's one and only apostle and a representative of Jesus Christ on this earth, that speaks to his credibility as a minister. And
tremendously.
And I'll let you share, but I'll share from my perspective. When I was doing the research for my book, Cults and Closets, I studied various resources, and what hit me about that rumor was that no one had really denied the rumor other than, of course, Herbert. But even Ramona, even him, and even Herbert in his own, in the testimony in his divorce proceeding with his second wife, Ramona, it wasn't denied. And that lack of denial by the family, to me, speaks volumes as to the credibility of that rumor. And,
well, I'm certainly not going to deny it. And there's other family members that would, in fact, say that it did happen. And but I think that they kept quiet for many years, mostly to protect his daughter.
Yeah.
Because she was still alive, but she has since passed on. And I have heard from a couple of different family members, including my mother and including one of Herbert Armstrong's grandsons, that it was in fact true.
Yeah.
So I personally did not discuss it with Dorothy, and she never personally told me that this is what happened. No one ever personally that was involved with it told me that it happened, but I very much believe it did, just because other members of the family have told me that it did.
Right, your mother as well, right?
Yeah, my mother told me so.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to touch on one more subject before we wrap this up, and you know what I'm going to ask you about here. It's the question of the allegations of incest, that Herbert committed incest with his youngest daughter, Dorothy. Can you share a little bit about what you were aware of, what your family was aware of, or at least the opinions? And I'll just preface this by saying, I acknowledge that, I don't certainly have any proof, and I don't think probably anybody but those involved have proof of it, but there's a lot of documentation. And the reason I think this is important to bring up is Herbert Armstrong presented himself as God's apostle and clearly a minister of Jesus Christ, to say the least. And I think by the qualifications that they quoted themselves in the scriptures, he was certainly not qualified. So there's a lot of hypocrisy there. But can you speak to the incest allegations and what when you became privy of that? How were you at Ambassador, or was that before? And just speak to that a little bit, if you would.
I had known about that before. It is true. It is a matter, again, obviously I wasn't there, but it is a matter of family lore. It is something that is accepted and believed in the family. We all knew it happened.
Yeah.
Nobody spoke about it because of Dottie. We didn't want to disturb or upset her. None of it was her fault. She was, she was only 14 or 15 when it began. So she was not capable of consent in the first place. So what it was basically rape.
Right.
But it went on for quite a while. And yes, he did commit incest with his younger daughter.
Did you become aware of that through your mom, or how did you learn of that?
Well, I mean, I don't know how it came out, but I don't know how long Mom knew about it. It was one of those things that was not spoken of much, but everybody knew it. You know, these things that kind of hover over a family. You know about these things, and yet you don't make it a topic of conversation.
I was also forwarded an email from David Antian, Gardner Ted Armstrong's brother-in-law, who also confirmed that this was accurate. I think most of you have become aware that the majority of the elite in this world are sexual perverts of the highest order, and particularly of this persuasion. Is that just yet another coincidence? I think it's now apparent why Herbert would have received an award like the Cross of Constantine. I would like to show one last clip that I found quite disturbing. It's Herbert Armstrong presenting an award to legendary pianist Arthur Rubinstein after his performance at Ambassador Auditorium. Herbert says that they share a love of the Bible, but Arthur's own obituary said he didn't believe in God and didn't want religion at his funeral. Arthur is quoted as saying he didn't believe in God, he believes in something greater. That just sounds like more syncretism.
Maestro Rubinstein, there is no equal in the world. The most precious hands in the world. In appreciation of your wonderful performance tonight, and there are not words in the English language to describe it, I want to present to you a piece of Steuben. Our mutual friend Moshe Cole says we both have something in common, the love of the Bible.
How wonderful.
This
is
is
beautiful.
A piece of Steuben showing Moses on Mount Sinai smashing down the tables of the Ten Commandments when he found Israel worshiping an idol.
Oh, what a beautiful piece. Oh, that is so The next applause I want you to give to that great presenter and maker of peace and great helper to humanity, and I think one of the best people I've ever met in my life. I'm very grateful to him for letting me play in this hall he created and for the case which he had at heart. I thank him very much. Please give the next great applause on my part to Mr.
Please give me one good reason why Herbert would give a self-proclaimed atheist a statue of Moses smashing the Ten Commandments. I can't think of any good reason. So in the whole scheme of things, did Herbert know everything going on around him, or was he just a puppet? Was the answer somewhere in the middle? We may never know. What I do know is the Bible says that false teachers and false prophets follow their own lusts. They are deceived and think they are really doing what is right and in turn deceive others. This is not just the case for the lower-ranking members of secret societies, but also at the top. They believe that their syncretic view of the world is accurate, and the average person simply is not enlightened enough to understand it. Masonry, like all the religions, all the mysteries, Hermeticism and alchemy, conceals its secrets from all except the adepts and sages, or the elect, and uses false explanations and misinterpretations of its symbols to mislead those who deserve only to be misled, to conceal the truth, which it calls light, from them, and to draw them away from it, Truth is not for those who are unworthy or unable to receive it, or would pervert it. Albert Pike, Morals and Dogma, page 104. How many leaders still in the Church of God are wolves in sheep's clothing? How about the similar Hebrew roots and Messianic movements? Scripture tells us that we should expect it. God sends the false prophets to test the people. Satan knows the Bible, and I believe he knows chapters like Deuteronomy 4, among others, that state that the northern kingdom would be scattered and wake up in the end time to their identity and start keeping the law again. As a result, I feel that Satan has co-opted these movements right from their inception. The entire Millerite movement has been full of Freemasonry, from William Miller to Charles Taze Russell to Ellen G. White. Here is Ellen and James's tombstone, and if that's not enough, here is the marker from her visit to Australia. Obelisks, go figure. We can all learn some lessons from this, whether we are a part of Worldwide Church of God or not. There really is nothing new under the sun. And the most important thing I think we can learn is to not follow a man. Jeremiah tells us, "Cursed is he who puts his trust in man." While ministers should help in the growth, teaching, and encouragement of people, the relationship you have with God is up to you. No man's going to stand in your place on Judgment Day. Only Jesus, with the power of his redeeming blood, will be there to assist you. I think this should also teach us the importance of not having any open doors in our life that the enemy can exploit. We are also not to make oaths like some of these groups do. Jesus said, "Let our yes be yes and our no be no, for everything else is of the evil one." Whether Herbert was a member of an occultic order or not, he was involved in things that no true minister of God should be involved with. We're not supposed to try and be friends with the world and make world peace. We're supposed to preach the gospel to the world. And just because someone like Herbert Armstrong gave a poor example, so what? As Paul says about some of the unfaithful Jews, that doesn't reflect at all on God and his faithfulness. How much deeper does this rabbit hole go? Were letter agencies involved with these visits? What was it about Ambassador College and the Worldwide Church of God that leaders all over the world knew of its reputation? For that and more, you'll have to wait until the final installment of the series. Please subscribe to this channel to be notified when it is available. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please give me an email listed here on the screen.